Welcome back, folks. We have one more important panel for today, looking at really many of the same issues, but in the more specific arena of immigration law, where actually, sir, if I could come back to your hypothetical about a prayer for Hassan Nasrallah, there's that medical doctor at Brown University who is in deportation proceedings because she attended his funeral, evidently, right? So immigration law is a really important arena where these issues are being played out. So on that note, I just want to thank our whole panel and our moderator, Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, Executive Director of the Interfaith Center of New York, and she'll introduce the rest of our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a great honor to be here. We really look forward to this partnership with New York Law School and the things that have come of it, the fruit that's been born of it. And thank you all for being here now. I can't think of anywhere else actually I'd prefer to be. So to talking about the issues that we are discussing. When it comes to immigration, I guess we have the opportunity to apply a lens in this specific area, recognizing that all aspects of life as a new New Yorker or coming somewhere else, it touches on the fundamental parts of our democracy. And that's really what we're going to be spending a moment on here. And we have an amazing group of panelists to do that. And what we're going to do, I think, is go through probably just, I'm going to introduce people from, my right down to the all the way down at the end of the panel down there. And then we'll have about 6 or so minutes to hear from each person. We'll then have a question or two discussion in the panel and open it up to all of you. So immediately to my right, Professor Alina Das is the professor of clinical law at James Weldon Johnson Professor and co-director of the Immigrant Rights Law Clinic at New York University School of Law, and somebody that we have worked with for many years on how to protect and assist the rights of New York's newest residents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alina.
Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you to everyone who organized this event and all of you for attending. As Reverend Breyer mentioned, I teach the Immigrant Rights Clinic at NYU Law School, and in that capacity have represented people facing detention and deportation and worked with community organizations on different immigrant rights campaigns for many years. And in part because of the work that we have done hand in hand with New Yorkers who are facing deportation and detention, we have been drawn into supporting the sanctuary movement here in New York, both in terms of the kind of legislative policies that we've seen of the city at different points in time trying to protect New Yorkers and ensure that city resources are not used for federal immigration enforcement, but also more fundamentally protecting the movement at its core roots, which is very much grounded in civil society, in houses of worship, in immigrants and citizens coming together to decide how they want to be protected, how they want to navigate their lives here in the U.S. Without living in constant fear that they could be taken at any moment. And as part of that work, and in my scholarship and as a law professor, I've really, for many years, have been obviously extremely concerned about how the U.S. immigration system, and specifically the deportation and detention system, has been used for all sorts of purposes that have nothing to do with immigration, but are much more about a different form of social control that many communities of color in particular and other marginalized groups have experienced in the U.S. And those laws have been on the books for decades. And so it's certainly nothing new to this particular administration. But I think the focus of my remarks, and we'll hear more from the other panelists about how transformative this particular administration has been, I would like to focus on how it has expanded detention and deportation and the dangers that poses to everyone, both people living in this country who have U.S. citizenship, as well as really the entire world, which is watching very carefully what's happening here. And so from the perspective of detention and deportation, I think the Migration Policy Institute wrote a report pretty quickly after the Trump administration has come into power the second time, noting how deeply the government has used, I think they say, a whole of government approach to focus on this goal of mass deportation. So you see really a tremendous amount of resources being spent on immigration, detention, and deportation, but not just within the usual agency, the Department of Homeland Security, but as we're seeing in terms of looking at the military, of really redirecting resources towards immigration enforcement, and the spillover effects that it's had on other sectors, whether it's our schools, our houses of worship, different community groups that had previously felt that they were perhaps safer to a degree than other sectors of society. And I think we'll hear more about that from our panelists as well. And so those changes that we saw, this kind of whole of government approach, has been incredibly alarming, from the rescission of the sensitive locations memo to changes to asylum policy to kind of what we're facing in the next couple of weeks, seeing whether or not there will be any funding for the representation of children who are facing deportation. These are really horrific issues that in some cases, I think, make headlines. In other cases, are part of this kind of very technical bureaucracy that is slowly transforming the system without anyone quite noticing. And so those are all incredibly disturbing. But I would say, in addition to the federal government using all of government to try and focus on mass deportations, the reverse is happening as well. The federal government is using immigration to change all of government. And we're seeing that in particular in some of the more egregious things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. We're seeing that in terms of ideological exclusion and deportation. So the use of people's political beliefs, their viewpoints as a reason to target them. Now, that is not necessarily new. Reverend Breyer and I have worked very closely for many years on behalf of many leaders of the sanctuary movement, including in New York, Ravi Ragbir and Jean Montreville, who were targeted, detained, and Jean was actually deported in the first Trump administration because of their advocacy for immigrant rights. Now, I had been representing Ravi Ragbir at the time for many years on a variety of issues in his immigration case. These are leaders of the New Sanctuary movement in New York City. And so we were able to stop his deportation and win for momentarily an incredible First Amendment case on his behalf that we then used to bring Jean back. And we're able to, through the advocacy support of civil society, really basically convince President Biden both to bring Jean back and then on his last day in office, or the day before he left office, to grant Ravi Ragbir a presidential pardon to remove the underlying basis of his deportation, which shows, again, the power of movement to sustain itself through a very repressive tactic that was used. But now we're seeing it again, and this time there's no secret as to what's happening. When Jean and Ravi were targeted, I think we were scratching our heads for a minute, being like, is this what we think it is, right? They were saying, oh, we're just business as usual. And we're like, but these are both leaders of the New Sanctuary Coalition that you decided to try and arrest the same day. This doesn't seem like business as usual, but it took us a moment to kind of really grasp that it was retaliation. What we're seeing now is very obvious. It's being tweeted by the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, Department of Homeland Security is giving interviews saying that we are targeting people because of their protests, which I think shows, again, the way that this is not only going to transform immigration law, but it's it's a test of the First Amendment, and that affects everyone's rights, our right to speak, our right to listen, our right to assemble. And so I think that that's an important issue that's unfolding. I also wanted to just briefly touch upon the other really extreme thing that's happened in the last couple of weeks, which is the use of the Alien Enemies Act to not only deport Venezuelans from the United States, but to deport them to a third country for imprisonment, which is, again, it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, the whole law itself, which is ancient in our world, is extraordinary that they're even using it, and that the way that they're kind of trying to expand it to apply to this category of people. But even just the notion that you can take someone, and there are people here, New York City folks who had hearings that were scheduled to happen in the next couple of weeks who were suddenly disappeared. And we had, lawyers in our community who were saying, I don't know, I didn't realize my client was gone until it had already happened. That this assault, not only on due process, but creating such an extreme punishment for individuals in this category that then shifts our discussion of what's normal, even further rightward. And I think that's the concern, because in court, many litigators are fighting for many of these people, whether it's students who are facing repression for their speech, or Venezuelans who've now been deported, possibly in violation of a court order, to a third country for imprisonment, just to get them back to the status quo, which was really bad to begin with, really vulnerable to begin with. And so I think the question here is not only how we fight in the courts to preserve the status quo, to preserve the minimum constitutional protections that have been recognized or assumed to exist for many years, but also how we outside of the courts as a civil society come together to ensure that people don't allow this to further normalize the cruelty of the system, to allow us to become numb to the everyday injustices that have long existed before the first or second Trump administration, and to ensure that we are moving towards a different vision in which we can be proud of what the status quo is. So with that, I'll end.
Thank you so much, Alina, and for all your dedication on this, on so many fronts, particularly as it pertains to those two individuals who really do stand out as both in terms of what the legal response, but also the civil society's response that you help bring together, I think is a great model for this moment. Cynthia Katz, we are so glad you're here, and you'll tell us a minute about a little bit about your work in terms of being at HIAS, which has been known in the past as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. I manage a team of attorneys in New York. We represent asylum seekers and people who have fled persecution on the accepted grounds of asylum. So there are 5 grounds, and they are religious persecution, political opinion, membership in a particular social group. So for example, that would include people from the LGBTQ+ community, as well as sometimes women who are seeking refuge from abusive situations that the government can't protect them to live freely. And then of course, there's 2 other grounds of asylum, but that gets into the weeds, but they're all very, very important. And we also protect refugees. So I want to make the distinction at the start, because HIAS as an organization represents refugees and asylum seekers. Refugees are people who have come to the United States with legal status. So it's the equivalent of the asylum process, but that has gone on and taken place, that vetting process has taken place outside of the US borders. As you all probably heard in the media, unfortunately, many, many organizations, not just HIAS, have been decimated, almost destroyed by executive orders and limitations on funding that attacks the refugee program. And the surprising thing that we have discovered is that, yes, this administration has said that it's going to combat illegal immigration, but refugees came to the United States as legal entrants, and they entered legally. So that's a bit, quote unquote, perplexing as well. And we'll get into the weeds, I'm sure, especially through the rest of our conversations, as well as our discussions about what does that mean. Right now, that means that organizations like HIAS, like the speakers earlier this morning mentioned, Clinic, Catholic Charities, for example, are cutting staff. We are now in a situation where we did have a partnership with the federal government to handle a lot of the welcoming of refugees and asylum seekers, people who've won their asylum claims, and that funding is gone. Our staff has been cut by, I think I've got a percentage here, it's hundreds of people. We face closing of offices overseas, limitations here in New York, as well as in Silver Spring, right outside of Washington, D.C. What does this mean for our clients? We still work as team members with them. And I think what I hold dear in my heart is something from Deuteronomy that I think a lot of people of faith here will recognize. And in Hebrew, it says, Sadik, Sadik, Turdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And I think that that is our guiding mission. Yes, we have been assaulted, but we will continue to fight. We will continue, as John Lewis, the late John Lewis said, continue to fight the good fight. We will also continue to practice another Hebrew term, tikkun olam, and that means to repair the world. We will try and we will continue. We have for over 100 years. We're one of the oldest resettlement agencies in the United States, started because in part, no other organizations would help Jews fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe. Now we represent people Jewish as well as non-Jewish. We had a lot of the people in our refugee program were religious minorities fleeing persecution in their countries all over the world. So as we provide direct legal services, that means that I represent people, my team represents people who every day have to go either to the immigration offices. There's one right here in 26 Federal Plaza, which also holds the adjudicatory offices, as well as the immigration courts. Well, there's also another office, two offices. The local asylum office for our area is either in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. There's a satellite office here in Manhattan, or there's an office further out on Long Island. And we can also get into the debate as to why so many people are assigned to offices so far away from the 5 boroughs or even Nassau County. And that's a whole nother discussion. But what we do is try to address on a daily basis the fears that our clients face every day, whether they are in status, whether they are out of status, whether they've already had petitions approved. They are petrified. They're not coming forward for services to which they are entitled. That means they're not sending their children to school. They're not going to doctor's appointments. They are petrified of reporting into immigration. And we don't even know when cases get rescheduled at immigration. Oftentimes it's because that immigration judge has been fired. And that has all happened in 2025. So we serve a couple of hats. We try to bring some peace and dignity to our clients as we represent them. They are also considered below the federal poverty guidelines. So we seek people at HIAS. We represent people who are they've been forcibly displaced, and we are representing them because they fear persecution should they be forced to return to their home countries, and also because they cannot otherwise afford an attorney to represent them. I've got many more comments to provide as we go on, but I think this is a good breaking point for me to go on to my next colleague. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. And also the reminder that HIAS was one of the few organizations that let in people, during the Second World War. That was really, really interesting, and a reminder of what people were saying at the beginning, which is it's not just about under pressure thinking of yourself, but also thinking of your neighbors. So thank you for that organizational reminder. Elizabeth Platt is our next speaker. She is the director of Law, Rights, and Religion Project at Columbia University Law School. And again, someone who has been a great partner over a long amount of time. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. So I am not an immigration lawyer. I'm expert on law and religion, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we might see religious liberty law play a role in the currently, in the past, in the future, play a role in protecting migrants and those who work for and with them. I'm going to very briefly take us to law school and do as quick as possible Religion Law 101, and then give some examples of some, again, past, current, and potentially future cases at this intersection. So right now, one of the most robust protections for the right to practice your religion is actually not the First Amendment of the Constitution, but a federal statute called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. You probably read about this law most notably in the Hobby Lobby case about the contraceptive mandate of the Affordable Care Act a while ago now. But what RFRA says is that the government cannot impose a substantial burden on your exercise of religion unless that burden is necessary to advance a compelling government interest. A lot of legalese there, but basically this provides a really broad right to be exempted from acts of the federal government and policies that stifle in any way your religious practice. So to bring a case under RFRA, a religious objector, again, first, you got to show that there's a substantial burden on your religiously motivated activities. RFRA protects all people of faith. You don't have to be a faith leader. You don't have to be a member of a church. You don't even have to be identify with any particular denomination. You can be kind of spiritual but not religious, for example. And it protects immigrants. You don't have to be a U.S. citizen, although you do. I won't go too into it. You probably have to be inside of the country. And your beliefs can be highly idiosyncratic. Again, they don't have to adhere to any sort of formal doctrine, as long as you can show that you're sincere. And so if you're able to show this substantial burden on your sincere religious belief, then you are entitled, again, from an exemption from a federal law or policy, unless the government can show that this burden is narrowly tailored or necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. That government interest should be the government's interest in enforcing the law on you, specifically the religious objector. You can't just say, oh, we have an overarching interest in the law, or in immigration enforcement generally. That shouldn't be sufficient. And any sort of existing under enforcement or exception to this law or policy can be used as evidence to show, actually, well, you made an exception here, you can make an exception for me to protect my religious practice. I do want to just emphasize again that RFRA only creates narrow exceptions for particular religious objectors. This is not a kind of law that can let you strike down a law and policy altogether. It's only a carve out for the religious objector. So why am I talking about religion law when we're all sitting here learning about immigration? There have been several past and ongoing cases where people of faith who either are migrants themselves or who work with or for migrants have sought to bring religious liberty lawsuits in order to protect themselves or these activities. And probably the most famous one that you might have read about during the first Trump administration was a group of volunteers with the organization No More Deaths, who successfully defended themselves using RFRA when they were prosecuted by the administration for leaving food and water in the desert for migrants. A second successful use of RFRA was by Reverend Kaji Dosa here in New York. And she brought a case, and the court eventually found that the government violated her religious beliefs when it emailed the Mexican government asking the government not to let her into Mexico to minister to migrants. A few other cases I'll try to run through quickly that are worth mentioning. In Rodriguez v. Sessions, the wife and children of a Seventh-day Adventist man challenged his deportation as a violation of their religious liberty. They said, This man is the spiritual head of our household. We need him here to practice our religion. And that case actually settled favorably. As another one is Austin Sanctuary Network v. Mayorkas, in which undocumented women living in sanctuary, again, challenges a religious liberty violation. These exorbitant fines that they received for essentially failure to leave the country. And then recently you might have heard of two multi-faith lawsuits, one of which we'll hear a little bit more about, challenging with the withdrawal of the sensitive locations memo as a violation of religious liberty. Now, this was sensitive locations memo was a policy that for around 30 years said ICE can't go in willy-nilly to these sensitive locations and make arrests. And that list included hospitals, schools, and houses of worship. And so the withdrawal of particularly the protection for houses of worship was challenged as a religious liberty violation. And there has been a stay of that in one of the, we've gotten an initial decision in one of the two lawsuits, although litigation is going to continue for a while. And then finally, you may or may not have heard of one case in Texas called regarding a Catholic affiliated organization called Annunciation House, which provides housing to migrants, among other things. And AG Paxton came in, asked for documents, and eventually tried to shut them down. And they also have brought a religious liberty defense, although under a state version of that RFRA law I mentioned, because they're getting harassed not by the federal government, but by the state. So they had to rely on a state version of that RFRA law, which now over half of states have. And then finally, I want to briefly touch on one last area that I imagine folks may be wondering about, which is what about harboring? Has this ever came to play in that area? And I'll say we have very, very, very little to go on when it comes to religious liberty defenses to violations of the federal harboring statute. There were a couple arguments made to this effect during the initial sanctuary movement of the 1980s, when houses of worship across the country were helping bring in refugees into the country and providing them a whole range of services. There were a bunch of arrests under Reagan, and they tried this. Those cases were not successful in making a religious liberty claim. However, that was pre-RFRA, and a lot has changed in terms of religious liberty law since the 1980s. So I don't know how applicable those cases are. And then there was one additional case, 2019 suit involving a Methodist man who helped this one undocumented couple find housing, help them run a restaurant, was charged with harboring. And a district, he did make a RFRA defense, and the district court rejected his argument for a RFRA exemption from harboring, but he ended up not being convicted anyway after a mistrial. So again, this is just a lower court, one district court opinion, not a lot to go on, and he ended up not getting almost no punishment anyway. So I think when you're thinking about strategies and like whether people really have an appetite to crack down really harshly on people who are acting out of their faith, you know, it's something to think about. I will stop there. I know I talked really, really fast. I'm sorry. So happy to answer any questions during Q&A.
Thank you so much. Rucha Kaur is our next speaker, and the Managing Director of Education and Community Development at the Sikh Coalition. And I believe, were the Sikhs also part of that that case that's before on the sensitive sites?
Yes, the lawsuit that Democracy Forward brought forward. Yes, one Sikh Gurdwara or Sikh house of worship was part of that lawsuit. And I'm happy to talk more about it. I just wanted to start by thanking everyone for the opportunity to be here. The previous panel was 4 tax attorneys and a rabbi. This is 3 lawyers and a lawyer's wife. Let the jokes begin. The Sikh Coalition is a civil rights organization. It was formed right here in New York in the hours after 9/11 to combat the rising hate and discrimination that members of the Sikh community had started facing. So over the past 23 years, our organization has been providing direct legal services to members of the Sikh community who find themselves in situations where they are unable to practice their faith freely and are facing bias and discrimination on the basis of their religious practice. I am not an attorney. I do not work on our legal team. I am, however, the managing director of education and community development, and my work and the work of our teams in the organization is to ensure that community members have opportunities to better understand their rights, to have the information that they need to make good decisions and feel protected in this society. So, like I said, the Sikh Coalition does not provide legal aid for immigration cases directly. However, we have accumulated a body of knowledge through our work around Sikh immigrants and all that goes with it. So we've worked over the years with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection on a variety of different issues related to the Sikh community, including handling of articles of faith at the border or Sikhs in detention center and religious rights of Sikhs in the detention center. We've really combined this knowledge that we've accumulated over the years with the US-based Sikh community's own history. There is growth via immigration and naturalization in the United States for the Sikh community for over 130 years. And that it really is what informs a lot of our work in this arena of immigration, which, as you know, in 2025 is definitely a very complex and relevant issue for most communities. And the Sikh community is absolutely no different. The sensitive sites memo, when the sensitive sites protections were rescinded in January, the Sikh Coalition and many organizations like ours, we had to quickly move and scale our efforts to make sure that our community members were informed of their immigration rights as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, as we were witnessing changes in federal policies. And these changes continue, our work continues, and we kind of zig and zag as we get more information. So we quickly moved to bring immigration experts into the fold, specifically immigration experts that are familiar with working with Sikh community members, but also those who understand or are quickly able to understand and process these federal policies as they're coming through. And then we created resources to address immigration in all aspects of our life. So personal, professional, and spiritual. These resources live on our website. They're in both English and Punjabi, and they essentially entail, they're largely immigration rights information, and they engage and they deal essentially talk to community members about how to engage with immigration enforcement as individuals. So for example, what to do if ICE comes to your home, or if ICE visits a workplace, or if ICE visits a gurdwara, which is, like I said, a Sikh house of worship. And then our work, once the resources were created, really my team and others in the organization worked very quickly to disseminate this as widely as possible. So this included everything from in-person visits at gurdwaras and tabling and talking to community members to webinars, to Indian and Punjabi press outreach as much as we could. We've done Instagram lives with attorneys. So really all the possible ways that we can reach a community and we can reach community members so that they understand what their rights are. I always want to, I guess, provide a disclaimer that the Sikh community, like all communities, is not a monolith. There is a very, very diverse and varied understanding of what immigration can and should be. And that comes with a lot of experiences and a lot of personal backgrounds, so on and so forth. So I never want to speak for the whole community. But in theory, this longstanding policy of protecting sensitive locations or protecting people in sensitive locations, or not allowing immigration, we oppose that reversal very strongly because really ICE agents entering gurdwaras or any house of worship, whether in raids or with warrants, is just unacceptable. It is not appropriate. It is not respectful, not conducive to the sense of community and belonging that is inherent to a gurdwara, and I'm sure it is inherent to all houses of worship. And really, this is where people come to feel a sense of belonging. People come to feel safe. People come in sense of community. And this kind of fear of armed agents coming to the Gurdwara really discourages community members from gathering. And I'll just provide a quick example. I know we're limited in time, but right after the sensitive locations memo was rescinded, I want to say maybe a week or so later, there were these widespread rumors of ICE agents coming to a Gurdwara in New York and New Jersey. And they were, we were calling the Gurdwaras and we were trying to figure this out, but it kind of spread like wildfire, and media outlets are picking this up, and it's being discussed in Indian and Punjabi media. It's being discussed in domestic media, and we couldn't substantiate those rumors, so we don't know what really happened. But it really does show how panicked folks are. I mean, it could have been someone asking for directions. We don't know, right? It could have been someone just interested in learning about the faith, which happens all the time because Gurdwaras are inherently open spaces. So it could have been any of that. But the rumor mill, and we really saw the fear and panic spread all around. So our work at the Sikh Coalition, we did very proudly work with Democracy Forward to provide critical information, background, context, etc. on the Sikh faith and community. We connected them to several Gurdwaras who were considering joining the lawsuit, and then the Gurdwara in Sacramento, the West Sacramento Gurdwara, decided to join the lawsuit. Thank you for your time, and I'm here for more questions.
Thank you so much. I think we'll just begin with a kind of to pull back the lens for a minute. This is a conference about the role of the law and really creating vibrant civil society. And this are multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy. Now, there are many democracies around the world that do not have our long history of immigration. And perhaps might not have the same kind of self-identity narrative, even as like as it pushed down as it is right now. We have this idea of ourselves as a nation, often made up of people from other places around the world. And I just wonder if that fact in and of itself, which is really a cultural thing in some ways, does that have any bearing, that history of immigration with all its highs and lows and problems, and that idea of a kind of national narrative about it, will that affect, does that in any way change or affect anything that we're facing right now in terms of the threats to our vibrant civil society?
Well, I'd like to just frame it with keeping in mind, yes, we have a history of immigration in the United States, but unfortunately, we also have a history of xenophobia. And it repeats itself. It's cyclical, I think. Sorry, I just wanted to frame it like that. I think that explains a lot of what we see and what we have seen historically.
I would agree that it's the tension between those two things, and they drive each other, right? That I think your question really gets to, because while we do have, there is a version of this identity, even, and it's problematic too. So there is criticism even of the idea, even the terminology of being a nation of immigrants, because obviously that excludes two very important groups of people. One, obviously, people who are indigenous to this land, and to people who were enslaved and forcibly brought here, or at least it has to be categorized when we're talking about immigrants. There's often the sense of like this voluntary nature that excludes Black Americans from that particular history. And there's also, I think, a history of kind of emphasizing this in order to achieve certain ends, where there was a hope for there to be kind of an orderly immigration system and changes. And so I'm not sure that we, probably in part because of the diversity inherent in the United States, that we have come to terms with what we view as our identity. And certainly in terms of the rhetoric that we are seeing by certain political leaders who are pushing very restrictionist policies and policies of deportation and detention, is not one where they're embracing this kind of diverse set of views. It's actually all of those features of control are very much present in what we're seeing today. If you express the wrong views, you're not here. If you're from a certain country, we're going to assume you're dangerous. Like it really cuts across those issues. And then I think this goes back to the piece I started with about worrying how this ties to that fundamental shift in all of government, how immigration is being used in that way. Because when you see the attacks on education, on diversity initiatives, this kind of erasure from US history of our past wrongs and an inability to speak about our current wrongs, you are seeing a way in which a new national identity is attempting to be forged. And once we lose those values and that history, I think it becomes much harder, again, to what we're fighting for ends up being a little bit better than where we are now. And that's not where I think we fundamentally want to be. I think the hope throughout all of history is that we're making progress. And now it feels like even that progress is the foundation of that is being taken away. And the assumption of what progress looks like is very different now. So I think those bring in real tensions across beyond just immigration issues.
Building on that, there is a sense in which the way that the crackdown on immigration and all of our rights is framed by the current administration is around protection, right? Protection of American society. This is possible because it is protecting our way of life. It is protecting us from crime. And so I'm wondering is there any, how would you respond to that?
Want me to? Okay. What I often tell people, excuse me, is that the government needs to protect everyone. And it plays itself out, as we all know, very differently. What I often say to immigration clients is, and particularly people who have come here without quote unquote documentation, is that imagine the analogy, and I think this works very well explaining it to US citizens. Imagine the analogy of you coming to my house, or I'm going to your house. Sometimes people come in with an invitation. I have distributed invitations. Sometimes people don't come with an invitation. They just show up, they're here at my door. Or I went away for vacation and I come back and let's say I live in a house with a lawn. The lawn has been mowed and there are beautiful flowers. So that person wasn't really invited, but I'm glad that person is here. I go into my house, there are no dirty dishes. I left the sink full of dishes. There's nothing dirty. The house is in order. It looks beautiful. But then I also have some other visitors, whether I invited them or not. And now they are behaving in a way that I think is disrespectful to me. And that's where the fight is. Is it disrespectful? Is that person no longer a guest in my house? How am I going to throw them out if I want to get rid of them? Why do I want to get rid of them? In my house, I've got a different set of rules, and I'm sort of like the the decider. But when we're talking about a society, there needs to be the rule of law, which we now throw around so freely this year. Where are the protocols? Who decides what's appropriate behavior and what's not? And how do we balance that? So did that person say something I just didn't like, or did that person hold a knife to my throat? So, and then there's everything in between that. So I sort of try to compartmentalize, if you will, and say, at what point do I say, or do I now as the state, the government, say that person is no longer welcomed? Especially if I already invited that person to my house. And I think that's where a lot of the argument, and that we operate in, or what I do, we operate in a field of nuances. It's very rare that it's totally black, totally white, but that's where the devil is literally in the details.
I'm going to go back very briefly to your first question, to say that tension, I think, between, that tension between like the nation of immigrants mythology and also the rampant history of xenophobia, I think, is also present in our theologies too. They're like, the notion that, not to rely on, I'm a Jew who talks a lot about Christianity. Like the Jesus is a refugee narrative, lies, right next to the kind of the Bible deference to civil law, right? And we've heard, was it Mike Pence who like used the Bible quotes to defend, family separation, and people were like, "What are you talking about?" So there are these, different theologies that have that tension as well, and have for a very long time. In terms of the note on like, protecting American culture, look, I'm not a sociologist, but I feel like I look around and I say, how is it possible to say that there's an American culture right now? All we hear is about how, we're kind of a nation at war with itself. And to say like, we need to protect, if anyone were to tell me we need to protect American culture, I would say, what is American culture right now? That's sort of what my initial, not super well thought out response to that question is like, what do you mean?
Organizationally, I will say that our position is that how we treat the most vulnerable in our society is not just a matter of laws and policies, but really a reflection of who we are. And it's a reflection on our values. It's a reflection on what we believe. So when we are talking about protections in our line of work, so like I said, Sikh Coalition, I think we really need to stop saying we don't work in immigration, because we do work in immigration now. But our bread and butter work is civil rights. So we work on hate crimes, and we work on bullying prevention, and we work on ending employment discrimination, right? Regardless of what your immigration status is, you have the protection of law to be able to report a hate crime. Or folks shouldn't have to worry about reporting if their child is being bullied in school or is severely hurt in any way. They shouldn't have to worry about their immigration status in order to do that, right? And I'm sure the lawyers here will correct me, but most states have strong protections for hate crime victims, regardless of their immigration status. And so my position, as just me, as a practicing Sikh, is also that Sikhi believes in Sarbat Dabala, which is for the good of all people. There's no asterisk mark there for the good of all people who agree with me, for the good of all people whose values align with me, for the good of all people whose immigration status matches a certain way, right? So for protecting who is the question that I would ask back, and protecting those who are the most vulnerable in our society is for all of us to think about and work on.
And I would just add, I think this theme of interconnectedness is incredibly important, because I too, like in talking with students and others, the house analogy is one that comes up quite a bit. And For me, I think the thought experiment that we've tried to explore is, we often think about, obviously we think about our own homes with the closed doors. We think about the country as a home. But if we start to shift and really think about the world as a home, and that it's not so much about, what we can do within particular closed doors and worrying about someone coming into that space. If you think about the world as a home and humankind as a family, the responsibilities that we have to each other become a little bit more clear. So it's not even so much that we're protecting ourselves from someone outside who's trying to do us harm. It's a question of, well, why is that person coming into this space? Does it matter if we're the ones who went into their space and set fire to all of their belongings and took all of their food out of their kitchen? And the analogy can get quite complicated if you think about the global interconnectedness that we have with people who are coming from other countries, often because of policies that we and other countries have utilized over many years to extract resources, to interfere with politics, to create harm. And so if we're part of a global family and in a global home that we have to, a planet that we have to take care of together, the immigration piece of this starts to fall away. So it's not to deny that there are issues in terms of resources, how they're distributed, issues in terms of violence, issue in terms of harm that we can commit against one another, and that we all deserve protection and safety. The question is, why is it that immigration, like a person's status, their paperwork, where they came from, and where we may want to send them to, what does that have to do with any of the problems we're trying to solve? If there's a problem of violence, sending someone away doesn't solve that problem. I think that's one of the things, even in very kind of fraught contexts that we've talked about, whether it's an issue about gang violence. We have seen how deportation of people who are not gang members help proliferate gang violence in other countries, and then that would come back here to the US. Whether it's domestic violence, we have seen people say, like, I don't want the person who has been abusing me to be deported. I want there to be some sort of system in place so that they are not perpetrating violence, whether it's against me here or against my family members who are abroad. If violence is the issue, immigration rarely solves the problem. It just creates this kind of, quick fix Band-Aid that people can comfort themselves by, but it just spreads violence even more broadly. And I mean, this is true of many of our kind of relying on the tools of the criminal legal system to solve all of these issues. And so when you step back and you think about, okay, well, now we live in a country where immigration enforcement gets more federal funding than all other law enforcement federal agencies combined, and that we have an administration that is now pouring more funding into that. It's like diverting military resources, like everything that is under the auspices of keeping us safe is being poured into immigration. Then when we think about any of the other issues, whether it has to do with gun control or solutions to addiction or, the lack of resources in our communities that often give rise to situations where people end up being in circumstances where they're unsafe. I think that's the real flaw. It's kind of like it's just a, smoke and mirrors situation, being like, worry about people's status. We're going to put all of the money into this, and you can then feel safe in your community. It's just not true. And I think we've seen that over history. If deportation were the solution to all our problems, then we would have deported ourselves out of those problems a long time ago. And yet here we are still with the same issues, even in our own communities. So I think taking immigration out of it, like if we could wave a magic wand and say, like, what if people could move the way goods move and money moves across the world, and we just actually focused on the things that we were worried about, what would that look like? What would we be funding? What would we no longer be spending our resources on? I think it then frees us up to actually talk about the real problems that are absolutely, I think, the case, but have very little to do with where you were born or how you got here.
Thank you so much. And then, so let's take a moment to any questions from the audience related to what we've been talking about here, either in the presentations or the Q&A. And if you don't mind identifying yourself and then asking your brief question, that'll help us get to more.
Can I go? Okay. My name is Serge St. Ledger Jr. I work for the New York City Public Schools in the Office of Policy and Advocacy. My question to the panel: has there been any interaction with your organizations through the Department of Education, New York City Public Schools, as far as supporting our families? Only because the anecdotes that you mentioned about families not sending their kids to school and sort of people disappearing in the shadows, we're trying to make sure that parents feel supported. So how do we go about doing that? And if there isn't sort of a partnership between your organizations and public schools, perhaps we can talk to try to form that a better partnership.
Thank you so much. I'm going to actually take the prerogative, because the Interfaith Center of New York has developed over the last 2.5 years a network of between 90 and 100 grassroots faith leaders, and that includes some very powerful parents groups in D1 and D3 that have done tremendous amounts of work at PS 145 at other places. Naveed Hassan, who I think was with the city for a while, and he's a parent at one of the schools. I think he played a big role in a resolution that I think you all passed that really is one of the strongest statements that any New York City agency has done. And I know just in terms of the activism, the direct needs in those 2 school districts has been really strong. That's my only add value. Yeah.
I would reinforce that. I participate in, along with some colleagues, in D3 and D1 meetings. And what we have tried to do at HIAS, particularly working with our social service team, is to make sure that the parents we represent know it's okay to go to school. The city of New York is supporting you. They are afraid. They are still afraid, of course, but we do make sure that we, try to distribute that voice and to reassure people. And I do think that the efforts have been successful. And there's other communities that we represent, unfortunately, are not as robust as the city of New York. That's a whole different issue. Nassau County, Suffolk County, New Jersey, some counties. But yeah, we do try. Thank you.
I don't know what the situation is with the school that was right next to Floyd Bennett Field, for example. What their situation is if the parents that moved there or were going there and then the field was closed, like how are they, who's supporting them? I just don't know. Okay, well, we could talk afterwards. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for bringing that information to all of us. My name is Filomena Acevedo from the Bronx, and I work for Hunger Free NYC. And I just want to mention, as you say before, that I work with the community, low-income community, very vulnerable people. And this is what I hear every morning. Filomena, I'm not able to go to school. I'm not able to go to the food pantry. I'm not able to do anything because, as you mentioned, it's a xenophobia, and it's huge when you work with this community. You don't know what to tell them. So that is my point, to confirm to you, it is a xenophobia, especially where I'm coming from the Bronx area. Thank you for this.
And I would like to also just add to that let's look at the school as a sanctuary, if you will. The kid has to get from home to the school. And a lot of times the child is not afraid of going to school, but what will happen to my parents if maybe they're not going to be home when I get home?
My name's Ilana Wallach, and I'm a member of the community and a bunch of groups. My question kind of tags off the two questions just now. Those of you who represent immigrants with varying degrees of status, what we call status, are you seeing trauma from this current situation that rises to the level of, people needing, I don't know, therapy or some kind of support more than just saying, New York City has your back, send your kid to school. And if so, what kind of resources are you finding to help people?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think there's a huge level of trauma. Anybody who's gone through this process, if they weren't feeling it before, would. And now, given the level of fear, I think for many people, they are living, hour to hour, day to day. Many of my clients have, there was an immediate shift in their kind of ability to plan for the future, which would swing from if I'm going to, work as many hours as I can to save money so that if something happens to me, my family will be provided for, to I can't leave my house to do the work because, there are so many sightings of ICE in our communities on the sidewalks, not in the schools or in houses of worship, but just, in the streets. And I think that level of trauma is huge. New York State has relatively, compared to other states, good laws in terms of access to certain healthcare benefits, even for individuals who might think are not eligible. But even with that, there's still a huge group of people who are not eligible for the kinds of health benefits you need for mental health services. So it is a huge need. And I think some therapists and counselors have been trying to fill that gap in ways that they can, to provide kind of free group therapy sessions, to have community meeting spaces where people can vent their feelings, to do it virtually. So if people feel like they can't leave their home, they have someone to talk to. But I had a client the other day who, because of his particular case posture, he lost his eligibility for healthcare, and everything he was going to therapy, he was getting support, and he lost it all just like that. And so to find people who are able to fill those gaps is a huge need. But it is very hard. It's very hard, far and few between, to find people who are able to provide regular counseling for folks who are not able to get insurance. I will say that it is often surprising who is eligible. So there shouldn't be an assumption that, oh, this person, they're not in status, or they don't have, maybe their paperwork's old. They may still be eligible, and there are organizations, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest has healthcare navigators. There are others that can do this very well. So I don't think anyone should assume that that's the case, that there's no healthcare eligibility. But once it is clear that there's no healthcare eligibility, it is devastating for somebody who's going to need the mental health support now more than ever to be able to process what they're going through and to be there for themselves, their partners, their children. So I personally find it devastating to know people who benefit from it and can't receive it. So for those of you who may be affiliated with the mental health community, I think a cadre of mental health experts who are willing to provide their services would be a very welcome thing.
I also wanted to talk about the reality of secondary trauma. And that is when people like ourselves constantly hear the trauma that other people, our clients, our friends, our family members are facing on a daily basis. So what we have tried to do, and I think that that's where the double whammy almost affects people, because if you're looking at faith as a place of comfort, but you're afraid to go to your house of worship, then you've got a loss of a coping mechanism. So what we've also tried to do is tell people, please continue to practice your faith. Please add, if you don't already do this, meditation, mindfulness. We also have a cadre of volunteers from a variety of specialties who will accompany people to immigration appointments or to a school visit with a counselor to explain, this is what my child is facing, or this is what we need. So that has been very helpful. So there's a bunch of tools that we're working really quickly to we've had in place, but to augment. And that is to take care of ourselves, putting on our own oxygen mask, as well as taking care of the loved ones and clients around us.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. I'm Ellen Clemo. I'm an attorney with Goldstein Hall representing faith-based organizations, and I'm also a Presbyterian pastor. I get a lot of questions from churches about, is it safe to go to our food pantry, or some of our mission outreach places still protected as sensitive sites? And after the two law memos you described to us, when I read those opinions that seemed to be very limited to the plaintiffs that brought the case and only partially resolved in their favor. So Professor Platt, could you tell us more about whether there is a broader sensitive place protection, or is it still not available and it's really on a case-by-case basis and people have to keep suing in order to get those protections?
Yeah. So, right there. So there are the two cases. One of them we haven't had any opinion in whatsoever. The other one, you're correct. The temporary restraining order only applies to the particular people, the groups that brought that case. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are more folks looking at those cases and trying to bring the next version. The other thing is, you can bring RFRA claims affirmatively. You can also bring them on defense. Some of the ones that I mentioned are people that were prosecuted and then brought RFRA as a defense. Obviously, that's not a posture anyone wants to be in, but it is a possibility. And similarly, those 80 sanctuary cases were also, they brought that as a defense after they had been investigated. There were undercover agents in their sanctuary meetings as part of a, like Reagan was essentially spying on the groups and then brought the prosecution and they used it as a defense. So good to know that it's available for you. I hope you never have to use it, but yes, so you're correct that currently the TRO only applies to those specific folks.
There's another, I think the National Immigration Law Center is supposedly researching another denominational or faith specific lawsuit that applies to the Sensitive Sites Act. Because I think we've had primarily Christian and some Jewish plaintiffs for the Georgetown one. Is that right? And this would be looking at things from a sort of Muslim perspective.
Okay, but still based on reference, still faith communities rather than like schools or. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, great. Good to know. And I know there's one other, I don't know if I'm at liberty to say who it is, but I know there's one other organization as well that's looking into it. So I think there's probably they're going to keep coming, is my guess.
Can I also just add, sorry to jump in briefly as one of the conference organizers, but the in the folder of CLE readings that you all have access to with the QR code that's out there, we have copies of the plaintiff's filing in the Democracy Forward case that was originally brought by a group of Quaker meetings, but then also joined by Baptists and a Sikh Gurdwara. And then we also have a copy of the memorandum of law, the temporary restraining order that the judge issued against DHS. So as you said, a partial victory in that case. So if people want to get really into the weeds on the legal language and arguments around this sensitive sites issue, there's more on that in the CLE readings.
But I mean, I'm curious because just, and Alina, maybe you can comment on this, but for every lawsuit, there's a civil society opportunity. Right. So I think there's something like, for example, April 5th, there's supposed to be a hearing. I don't know, or 4th or something around that. Like there are things that we can do, whether or not we are directly involved. We have the opportunity to show up and show support in a, correct me if I'm wrong here, but, show up outside or inside the courtroom. We have an opportunity to bring attention to the fact that this hearing is happening. We've got all sorts of opportunities. You want to say how we did that a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think with a lot of the litigation, both around sanctuary leaders and sanctuary movement, Court packing was an incredibly important part of it. Having faith leaders come to the court hearings and the cases that matter most, having them, along with the people most directly impacted by those lawsuits, be in the front row, in their religious garb, I think sends an incredibly powerful message to the judges, who are human beings, that people are watching, and that in addition to whatever, legal arguments are being raised, there are deep fundamental moral questions that are being implicated. And I personally believe 100% that any victory we've ever received was more influenced by that sense of things than any kind of fancy legal briefing that people were doing, because each side presents a choice to the judge, a way of, finding in their favor. And there is something else that is going to motivate that judge to do the right thing. So I think that is hugely important. And I would also say, I think to your point with the question, it is, I think it's been incredibly hard as a lawyer to know how to counsel people in these situations, because, whether it's a food pantry or a house of worship, or an individual, we have rights. They can vary in certain contexts and certain degrees, but for example, for private spaces, you have your Fourth Amendment right. There are protocols, and I know the Interfaith Center has a guide that has some sample language that people can say and voice if immigration enforcement does come to their door. And I think the reality, of course, is that people are afraid this is not going to do anything. And there is certainly a difference between whether you have rights and whether those rights will be respected. I think, but we can't, because we are afraid that the rights will not be respected, we should not be therefore giving our rights away. And so the stronger that every kind, whether it's a food pantry, a social service organization, a legal organization, can have those internal conversations to say, okay, this is what I understand our rights are, what we should say if we see something happening that is inappropriate, what we can do to document things if those rights are being violated. It's not, again, to say that it's not going to happen, the worst isn't going to happen, but it allows us to maybe hold our power a little bit more in those spaces, to be able, and then again, it's hard to counsel people. If somebody comes and says, is it safe for me to leave my home to go and attend this food pantry like I've been going once a week, during the last administration, now I'm not sure if it's safe. It is really hard to advise someone whether it is, but you can say, if you do come into our doors, we are going to say XYZ things, or these are our protocols, and that's going to be true. And you can't provide all the answers, but I think we do have to be very careful not to give our rights away, not to kind of obey in advance when we do have rights that need to be protected. And we have to have hope that through everything else, not what's happening in the courts, but at the groundswell of what civil society will do, that we will be back to a place where maybe we will be able to trust more readily that rights will be respected.
I just very briefly want to add that one of the things, as we're going out to different gurdwaras and talking to them, this is exactly what we're saying. Please understand what your rights are. Please have a plan in place. We hope you never have to use it, but please have a plan in place of who's going to be the first person to respond, what the exact what are the exact talking points? Does everybody in the Gurdwara leadership and the people who are at the Gurdwara on a Wednesday afternoon when there is not a service, like, does everybody understand what their rights are? And basic things like asking for identification, or difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant, just things like that, like things that I, as a non-attorney, never looked at or paid attention to. Now I know to ask about. And yes, we don't know if your rights will be respected, but we all have rights regardless of immigration status.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Nicola, and I wanted to introduce myself. I represent the new generation. I'm a U.S. presidential candidate. I was invited to the presidential elections in 2020 and 2024 by the White House presidential administration. I've been interviewing and campaigning with the U.S. Senate, the government, the U.S. military, the U.S. prison system, the university system, and the news. I'm here representing being young. I'm age 38. I'm female. I represent being Latina. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm poor, and I myself am legally married to a prisoner at the moment. We were allowed to be represent the new generation advocacy, supporting all these new changes in the law for our young community. Thank you.
Okay. Last question right here.
Right here.
I stepped up for a minute, but I have a question regarding to the status of DACA children. How are they classified? Because some of them have been deported, also returned back to homelands that they have no familiarity with, customs and so forth. So are they classified as immigrants, or are they falling under the category of this new administration of deportation?
So currently, the status of people who have deferred action for childhood arrivals, which is originally an Obama era program, is heading to the Supreme Court, and so its future is uncertain. But as of now, people who do have that status are still protected until that period expires. And there hasn't been an announcement that I'm aware of from the Trump administration that they're going to make a particular change to that program. So right now, somebody who has deferred action should be, like, let's say their employment authorization card says they have it for another, 18 months. They should be able to enjoy the protections of being of not being deportable for that period. Now, if they are caught up in an arrest, if there are other issues, if they try to travel, which is something that they had previously been able to get permission to do in certain circumstances, all of that can put current DACA recipients at risk. And then, of course, if we get an announcement from the Trump administration that they're, scrapping even the current program, or there's a Supreme Court decision, those would also put DACA at risk. But for now, if, for somebody who's staying in the US with DACA and not having a police encounter, I want to say they should be safe.
Thank you all very much. And if we could get a round of applause for our excellent panel. This has been a remarkable morning, and I'm just thinking back to our the first panel, the reminder about the importance of authenticity, whether we are, whatever profession we are, whatever vocation we have, remembering our core fundamental principles as a way of making decisions in a very uncertain world. And I think that is the reminder of that, and also the not giving away of our rights before we have to is if there were two themes that would come up for today, I think those are it. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to being in touch with you.